It gives 29 degrees today. 29 degrees. Unbelievable. Thankfully, it is currently 7 a.m, so it's still nice and cool. But by later on today, I will be so grumpy. I hate being too warm. Like, I really hate it. And it's little things like that which are going to be the point of today's video. You're all going to get to know me a little bit better. I need to unhook this wire, so back we go. I'm going to make 3 videos over the next couple of weeks. The first video, which we're doing today, is my story in farming. Why did I decide to do this job? What were the challenges I faced? What were the best moments and the worst moments? I'm basically going to tell you about my experience of being a farmer for the last 13 years. And we're going to weave that in with a little farm tour as we go. Then the second video in this series, which I plan to do for next Saturday, is going to be about the tech stuff, which is another big part of my life. Specifically, we are going to build auto steer, but that's for next week. And finally, the last video in this mini series is going to be about social media, which is the third piece of what I do with my life. So that's what's coming up. If that sounds interesting, make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss any of that. Let's go let the cows out and I will tell you the story of my life as a farmer over the last 14 years. So I think we need to start this story back in my teenage years because it might surprise a lot of people to know that I never wanted to farm. And honestly, I'd done very little on the farm as a teenager. I was so uninvolved that on Saturdays my dad had our neighbour come up to give him a hand to do the work. But that did start to change around the age of 16. Some of my earliest good memories from farming were driving that tractor. And it was starting to get to do fun jobs like mowing silage, which started to pique my interest. Farming was no longer just scraping cubicles and bedding cows, it involved machinery. It involved some of the most satisfying jobs you can do on a farm. But despite starting to enjoy some parts of farming at age 16, I still had absolutely no desire to be a farmer. And this is where we get to an interesting point of my life, when I had to choose what I wanted to do at university. Because whilst I didn't really want to be a farmer, I didn't really want to be anything. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. That sounds deeper than it actually was at the time. So I have to pick my uni course. I don't really know what to do. And for some reason, I decided to do a degree in agricultural technology. Still with no intention of actually farming. I think one of the main reasons I probably decided on that course was because of the fairly low entry requirements. It was 2 B's and a C. So I kind of figured choosing that course would save me a bit of work. So I head off to uni, do agricultural technology, really enjoyed my degree. However, I enjoyed the bits which everyone else hated. I enjoyed the technical, nerdy book stuff. And I absolutely hated the practical on-farm stuff. Whole way through uni, still no plans to farm. For a long time, I thought I would want to do a PhD or something. That was until I got to the very end of my final year. I had just finished doing my dissertation, just finished a 3-year degree, and I was totally fed up with studying and typing and doing book stuff. So I decided I might as well try farming. See if I actually enjoy it as a career. And not to spoil the ending, but I really enjoyed it. I came home to farm in 2012 and I've been doing it ever since. And then we have a period from 2012 to 2019 where my entire focus really was farming. I didn't do anything else. And despite what some TikTok comments will have you believe, I did not come home to a particularly well-run or efficient dairy farm. There was not a lot of money available to spend in 2012. And when I think back to just 13 years ago, it makes me realise how much has actually changed over that time. We were still mowing our silage with a 1998 Cavernan mower behind that tractor. We were still milking in an 8-point swing-over milking parlour. We had 140 cows and we were still cutting a lot of our grazing block for silage. The cows used to not go out to the fields nearly the end of April. My point is, it was a very different business back then. and I didn't have a lot of money to spend to improve things. So them 7 years from 2012 to 2019, which had the horrendous milk price crash of 2015 stuck in the middle of it, were spent cutting costs, trying to be more efficient. And the lesson I want to get across from them 7 years was that it takes a long time. I remember going to speak to my bank manager in like 2013, 2014 and telling him that I wanted to build a new milking parlour. And he essentially just told me, you can't afford it. So I went out of that meeting and I decided I would have to get the business to a point where I could afford it. So that's what we done. 2 biggest factors which improved our efficiency on this farm. Number 1, learning how to graze cows properly. And number 2, learning how to make silage properly. Both of them things did not happen easily. I made plenty of mistakes whilst trying to improve, but eventually I got there. And eventually we started making more money, and eventually I was able to build a new milking parlour. The milking parlour basically took me all of 2018 and 19, and we started milking in it in March 2020. And from 2020 and the completion of the milking parlour, things really started to accelerate. Whilst them 7 years were spent largely cutting costs, we did also make some purchases. We bought our 2 slurry tankers, but that was mainly because our workman tumbled our old slurry tanker and we got insurance money, so we kind of had to make that decision at that point. We also changed our mower from 1998 to a front and back Caverna mower. Probably the best investment I've ever made on this farm. Totally transformed our silage quality. And we also invested in small things. Like I bought this fertiliser sower out of Scotland for £3,000. Absolute bargain. But the focus in the early years of my farming career was very much on cutting costs and being able to afford to build a new milking parlour. And then in 2018, DAERA, back when it actually wanted to help farmers and not just sacrifice us, brought out a scheme called the Farm Business Improvement Scheme. And the timing was perfect for me. The Farm Business Improvement Scheme provided a 40% grant on capital projects up to £250,000. Now the application process was pretty extreme. It was an awful lot of work, but it was for an awful lot of money. So I think it was actually a fantastic scheme. So in 2018, I'd done my application for a new milking parlour, and I put so much work into that application. Now the Farm Business Improvement Scheme did have a problem, and that was that all of the applications got delayed for a year because of planning rules. So I had to wait for an answer for a very long time, but eventually I got the answer, and I remember the day so clearly. I remember the postman couldn't deliver it because there was no one there to sign for it. So at 4 p.m. when he was back at the depot, I rushed into Oma to get the letter. To confirm that I had got the grant and I could finally build my milking parlour, which by this point was essentially 7 years of work just to start the project. So I got my grant letter, went and got my bank loans and started to build our new milking parlour. And in March 2020, just before COVID, we finally moved in. And this one project really did transform our farm. Milking times went from taking my dad 7 hours a day down to just over 2 hours a day. The cows went up in milk because they weren't standing around for so long, and our feed rate absolutely collapsed. That was always one of the biggest problems with our business, was how much meal we were feeding. And because my dad done almost all the old milking in the 8-point swing over milking parlour, and he manually controlled how much cows got, our feed rates were always terrible. And we actually saved so much meal from moving into the new milking parlour that the saving covered the repayments. Like I said, the milking parlour was a transformational investment. By 2020, we hadn't been spending money because we'd been focusing on the milking parlour. So there was a lot of things that needed updated. And that all kicked off once the parlour was finished and we were actually making money again. We started by replacing our old 310 with this 420. Has to be one of the best things we've ever bought. A year later in 2021, we bought, or 2022, was it 2022? No, I think it was 2021. A year later in 2021, we bought the JF Harvester. And then in 2022, we bought our 8S. And this was an extra tractor. There was no trade-ins against it. So this was a big chunk of money. We also bought a new 12-foot folding buck rake and a new scoop when we bought our JCB. We bought the silage compactor. I think that was 2022 as well. And a few other small things. A new topper, a plough, a sprayer. And then last year in 2024, I bought this fertilizer sower. And finally, this year, I've bought myself a new feeder wagon. I am certain I forgot some stuff in there, but that gives you the general gist of how the farm has got to this point. We had 7 years of famine, 7 years of cutting costs, which allowed us to build the milking parlour. And the milking parlour transformed the business. And then after the milking parlour, we had 5 years of plenty. It sounds better if I say 7 years of plenty. It becomes biblical then, where we have managed to upgrade and update a lot of the machinery, which we couldn't do in the 7 years prior, because everything was focused on the milking parlour. And that brings our farm up to the current day. So what's next? Well, I plan to build a silage pit over the winter. There's a digger coming next week, hopefully, to start putting in some drains for that. And then other than that small project, we probably do have to wait another 2 years before we do anything big. And that's really just because some of the money I've spent is borrowed, and basically all of the loans, apart from the parlour loan, finish within the next 2 years. Things like a bounce back loan from COVID, which bought the JCB 420, and the finance on the 8S. And once all that finance has ended, we then have another potential big investment cycle on the farm. And I have in mind what I want to do, and it is an absolutely massive project. It will not result in me keeping any more cows, but it will make my life a lot easier. But we'll not get into that in this video. And all of that is dependent on Northern Ireland sorting out its ridiculous planning laws, which means that currently I couldn't even replace the cow house I have, which is mental. I have to do this video all in one take, otherwise I'm going to get totally lost and confused. So I'm going to finish it up with the highlights and lowlights of the last 13 years of farming. Let me go find another scene for you. You know what, the cows in the background would be pretty good. So we'll start with the bad points of the last 13 years, the challenges of farming. And I think the one that stands out most for me was just how much time I put into the farm up until 2020. I mean, every waking minute, the farm consumed me. It was all I done. And I got to the end of building the milking parlour, and I was just done. I was burnt out. I had just done too much work, which is a very controversial thing to say as a farmer, but that was honestly how I felt. And in the summer of 2020, in the middle of the COVID lockdowns, I kind of just took some time off. I remember that August just not doing things on the farm and instead going to the lake to go wakeboarding. And it was really hard to do, actually, because I'd spent so long being so dedicated, so particular about extracting every bit of performance, that it was hard to let things go. But one of the lessons I've learned since that point is that you just have to let things go. If you don't let things go and you strive for perfection, farming will consume you. It will take over everything, and it leaves no space for anything else. And honestly, it's still a bit of a challenge to deal with the fact that I have to let stuff go when it comes to farming. Our farm performance has never got back to the level it was in 2019-2020. The amount of money we make is actually probably kept increasing, mainly because of efficiencies from the new milking parlour, keeping some extra cows, but our facts and figures performance, our cost of production, I don't think will ever be as good as it was in 2021, where I still had my efficiency from my obsessive 7 years of cost cutting, but I also got the benefits of the new milking parlour. And of course there is other small lowlights built into all of that. Whenever the milk price crashes, then you feel like you're working for nothing. That's never a good feeling. Whenever things go wrong, largely because of the weather, again, it can be very stressful and very difficult. But overall, other than that point in 2019 where I got really fed up, I don't think I've had many bad moments in farming over the last 13 years. But I have had plenty of good moments. I found it so satisfying to see the business change over the 7 years of famine. It was so satisfying to see the improvement in silage quality over the last 13 years. I love buying new machinery. That is absolutely one of the highlights of doing this job. Getting the milking parlour completed and finally moving in was a huge moment in my life and reflected a huge amount of work. And it's days like this which really just make you think that farming is the best job in the world. And it reminds me that this career, being a dairy farmer, is worth fighting for. I want this to be an option for my children. But we'll get on to that in the episode on social media. Wrap this video up because I want to go for my breakfast. Hopefully you've enjoyed that little insight into my life. Slightly more personal video, something a little bit different. We will be back next week fitting auto steer to one of our tractors. That is another project that I've essentially been working on for 10 years. And then we will do a final episode on social media. And what part does that play in my life at the minute? Hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you did, please do give this video a like. It really does mean a lot. Consider subscribing so you don't miss the next 2 episodes in this series if you haven't already. And any comments, stick them down below. I really do enjoy reading them all. I will see you next week.